All right, thank you. Yeah, and I love it when these sessions get these sort of natural tie-ins. Like I'm thinking of Rick. Tiles, I'm working on a little bit, but yeah, absolutely. So maps are about something. I'm going to start with this simple statement. And when we embark on making a map, it's because we want to communicate some kind of message. You know, a cartographer will start with a question or a recently discovered data set or a topic of concern, personal interest, etc. Knowing the general direction or subject matter doesn't mean we know immediately how the map will be made or what it'll look like. But the idea we bring shapes all the subsequent decisions related to design and technology and scope and the tone of the map. So for example, you know, the decisions we make to build a map of river estuaries are going to be far different than ones we make for accessing hospitals. And you know, you can start imagining all kinds of hypothetical examples here. So I'm giving this kind of brief, loose description of this process, I guess, of doing cartography, and you might sense a little bit as a bit of a setup. And I'm setting it up this way because I want to set up a question or a problem that I have. And so, by contrast, I want to talk about something that's a challenge, a different way of approaching the cartographic craft, with which I haven't yet figured out how to forge like a smooth relationship. So a little context. At Esri, I lead a team of cartographers called MapX. And the X, by the way, is for experience. So it's like cartography and experience. And part of what we do is create custom maps for the company's rather enormous 3,000 plus page website. In addition, we make maps for various publications, like news magazines, like this is for the New York Times, for example, as well as campaigns that the company does, like ads in airport terminals and things like that. So basically, we make maps for many of Esri's kind of outward-facing digital channels. And in the majority of the projects we take on, that kind of almost taken for granted commonplace workflow or process that it described seems to be flipped. That is, oftentimes we'll know, say, the medium or the audience or the technical parameters and the purpose, but what the map is about, which, as we know, is what drives so many design decisions, can remain unknown at the beginning. So here's where subject matter was at the beginning. At first, I put it at the end. And we're instead starting with sort of a desired emotional or intellectual effect of the map. To this point, here's a list of things one of our MapX maps might do for the audience. And this is what I mean by that kind of desired emotional effect. So showcase what it means to think spatially. What is a GIS in general? What is ArcGIS? Demonstrate product features. Tell a geographic story. And then show the results of a workflow, that kind of aha moment when you learn something new by like doing geography. And so notice these are all either, as I kind of mentioned, like knowledge-based or emotion-based outcomes of the reader having spent some time with the map. The map-making process is, to me at least, is flipped. It's putting the cart before the horse, the desired effect of the map before the content. And even the bullet point here most closely related to story is simply the fact that you are telling a story. Yeah, so this is a riddle. It's a riddle for me, and I've been trying to develop ways to approach this design challenge. The styles, techniques, and maybe most crucially even the change of mindset that all allow for meaningful, expressive, relevant cartography to emerge when the initial subject matter remains really open. So how do you work backwards? And if I can put backwards in quotes there, I don't know if it's like exactly the reverse, but how do you work differently in this way? Well, I've had at least one very inconclusive insight, which I'll try to explain with a series of examples. So imagine you're talking to someone at a dinner party, and the topic of car models comes up. So we're not talking about the geography of car models, but I know that we could be. There's a number of cartographies to be made of car models, linking them to demographics or cost, different distance from place of production, where the parts are manufactured, where has the highest resale value, and et cetera. It's sort of an exercise that, I don't know, geographers at least, like I like to do in my mind when I start thinking about things, kind of daydream about like, what could the geography be here? Yeah, so you can start visualizing topics or items that we come across in the course of everyday life in terms of their potential or imagined cartographies. Like, wouldn't it be great to make a map of whatever? So what happens when this becomes a little more abstract? What if instead of car models, the topic is world driving cultures? So this one takes a little more effort to move from the geographic imagination to the appearance of a map. For one, it's not as obvious what would actually be mapped. I mean, I can think of items that might be more like book chapters, like how often you drive, road rage, running red lights, texting and driving, speed limits, honking, lane changing, merging practices, parking over the lines, all kinds of things, right, that could come into like, what does it mean to map world driving cultures? So how would that information or data, whether qualitative or quantitative, be collected? And it's more like, it kind of is more like a full-on research project, and I might not know what the map of this is until a few months or years into it. Okay, the point is that I'm making here is that it's a more abstract concept, and I can start to imagine like a rough geography of this, but less so a specific map. Now, okay, so now we're on a less concrete, as you can see here. So what happens if I go up another level in abstraction, and you start to become removed entirely of what the map might be? It's atopical at this point. Not concrete. So task, make a map. This is like a fictionalized version of something that we might work with. Fuse tools together, show that mapping is a framework for pulling all kinds of data from diverse sources like spreadsheets and remote sensed imagery into a single visual. Okay, I mean, it makes sense. We can probably all imagine a lot of things that might come out of that. Or this, not concrete. Help us replace the stock imagery with maps. So the usual methods of imagining what the map could be change direction. And when I sat with this for a while, this is one of the diagrams I came up with to express this kind of seeming impossibility of doing this kind of mapping. Okay, so fidelity to data at the top. I'm going to talk about this for a second. Is it a drawing that looks like a map? Or is it derived from geographical information? Or where in between? This is kind of the scale of like how much fidelity to data are you doing? And I loved imagined drawn maps. Okay, that's not the point of this. But the question is, where are you in that? Real world aha moment. So show like the intellectual conclusion of studying a map. And then not revealing industry. So sometimes this happens like, don't want to tell too specific a story. Now, so where does this black dot go? It seems to me you can pick one or two, but I don't think there's a situation where you can have all three. Can they be balanced? And this is really like what I'm trying to figure out. So we're left with something like this. The top one is the one I showed first. The bottom was the one I showed second. Subject matters at the other end, and this sort of putting your emotion into it is brought to the front, but changed into a like desired emotional effect. So note, these two are not the same thing, right? Going for a desired emotional effect in your readership without knowing the subject matter kind of moves the cartographer's subjectivity out from the onset. And they have to go about hunting for that subjectivity or that voice to make the map. You end up having to kind of hunt and peck for the motivation along the way of like, what is the thing? How am I going to start making these design decisions? Okay, so I think we've mostly, hopefully, logically sort of arrived here. So where do we go next? I decided to turn to the art world a little bit for some guidance. And I pulled up this great quote from a sculptor at the Art Center College of Design. It's a design school in Pasadena. And it's about aesthetics. So aesthetic judgment is situated in the world of things, not concepts. Aesthetic meaning is the result of physical experience rather than reading or decoding abstract, symbolic, or metaphorical. So key here is that reading the symbolic is what we can transfer for our purposes to reading a map. He's saying aesthetics don't come from the process of analyzing the message or argument of the map, but rather come from this direct visual or tactile experience. So if we can't start with subject matter, it might be that this is what we do have to start with. We start with aesthetics and focus on the map reader's physical experience, including visual experience of seeing the map. Okay, problem not exactly solved. We'd now be in a very low fidelity to data situation if we stayed here, which is great, if that's what you're trying to do. But nonetheless, what spatial messages, lessons, and theses can emerge from this approach? So the MapX team we're in the process of developing a style guide for the kinds of maps we make. And I'm pulling this from, this is like basic cartography variable kind of stuff. But I want to go back and just sort of toy with these things and see what we can do. To make maps using a reverse process, a reverse engineering, we've realized that we can tell the best stories when we use these visual symbols that already exist in the common cartographic lexicon. Okay, the maps have to already be somewhat legible to a relatively wide, or in some cases, very wide audience. This means designing maps that normally might not have legends and normally don't use text, but maintain a reasonable semblance to how a map might look and feel. We make these kind of maps high in the fidelity to data continuum, meaning they're made with researched and selected data sets. Then we're able to use things like image captions and other text content on a web page, for example, to let readers know or infer what might be going on. So from here, subject matter can start to emerge in various ways. There's a lot of things this map might be representing. And so spoiler alert, in this case, it's a map of eating and drinking establishments in Boston that have TVs, paired with demographic data of people who are most likely to watch sports on TV. But this feels only a little satisfactory to me, largely because there's only, it doesn't feel fully authentic to me. So can this be pushed further? And I believe to do so requires a change in mental register. And so why really, this is where my mind goes in my philosophy, in my philosophy moments, like why really is it so hard to make a meaningful map when you don't start with subject matter? It's possible the solution is a matter of breaking out of an inherited mold. And so to round out my talk today in the next minute here, I am going to go into philosophy, and I'm going to reach back 58 years to Foucault, Michel Foucault, in his 1966 book, The Order of Things. Yeah, I mean, he coined the phrase for this, right? What he called the episteme. And his way of describing it is this: any given culture, given moment, there's always only one episteme that defines the conditions of possibility of knowledge, whether expressed in a theory or silently invested in a practice. This is for you to ponder this deep thought. It's a picture of the Suez Canal. And so what's considered, if we think of Foucault here, what is considered natural, it's actually a product of these social forces shaped by institutions. And look, so it's not up to me alone, and I don't want this to be alone. I'm posing this as this whole talk is kind of like a question, almost like a reaching for community, right? It's not, I can't decide if we're in a cartographic episteme that's invisible, or that we don't quite know that we're in. But if we are in one, and there is this other way of doing cartography that we can't quite see, I think it's exciting to think about what new ways of understanding spatial phenomena could emerge if we break out of it. Thanks for listening, and I'm really curious to hear people's thoughts and insights now or after. Thank you. Okay. I was told there's time for 1 or 2 questions, if any.
Happy to shout it out as well.
Okay.
So, do you feel like if there is an existing episteme that we're working within, what you're doing seems like a more discovery-oriented process where you're given a emotion to elicit, and you have to find a phenomenon, a subject matter that elicits that kind of response. You feel like that's different from your kind of traditional approach to mapping, where you're imposing a response on a subject matter?
Yeah, so the question is that I'm finding myself in a situation where I need to bring subject matter into a desired emotional effect. Is that actually different than starting with a subject matter and then sort of I suppose it's possible, there's motivation when you start with a subject matter, right? It comes from a question. It comes from a personal interest. It comes from an outside need. Like, I need a map of this. Can you help me? I'm concerned about this problem. Can you help me figure out the spatiality or the geography of this as represented in a map? And I think that's I do think it's a lot different. I think it's a different way of weaving in, bringing your experience into okay, how am I going to tackle this? It's that kind of, what I was saying, you can kind of start imagine, what cartographic tropes am I going to lean on? I can see this is going to be, a movement map, because we're talking about migration. Okay, so all of a sudden I go into the what symbols are and you don't have any of that when you don't start with a question or a purpose or a subject. You're kind of that whole circle of the possibility of cartographic representational variables. And it's a little bit hunt and peck. So do you start with a list? Do you start with a list of possible and then just kind of try them out? You can pick random ones like the Boston TV sports things, but like I said, then it starts to well, I don't know if I care about that. It just sort of technically solves a problem. Yeah, thanks. I don't know if that helps, but I'm just kind of riffing. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to our next speaker, Mr. Breakfast.
Thank you.